Hello, everybody. It's Saturday, the 5th of October. Time for technology. That was the week with my old friend Keith Tier. The big news this week is that OpenAI, which I'm sure you've all heard of. If you haven't, you probably don't deserve to be watching or listening to this show, raised $6.6 billion in the largest VC round ever. And Keith is focusing on that in this week's newsletter, including his editorial. How big a deal, Keith, is this $6.6 billion latest raise by OpenAI?
Well, obviously it's big numerically. It's the biggest ever, as they say. Although Microsoft did put $10 billion into OpenAI earlier in its life, but that wasn't a VC round. So it's big numerically. It's big in what it tells you about venture capital. This did have venture investors in it, like Vinod Khosla, for example, but it really can't be described as a venture capital round because the round itself is bigger than almost every venture capital fund. So there's something new happening here, which is a bit of a throwback to the days before 2021, when very large investors were writing very large checks. For example, SoftBank put $500 million into this round, but they're not really venture capitalists. They're late stage, following the money, hoping to make maybe 3 times their money on the low side, a lot more on the high
Which
side.
is a lot. If you invest $1 billion, then you make $3 billion. I remember, Keith, we haven't talked about Tiger Global for a while. You used to talk about them all the time and the changing nature of venture. Are we going back to firms like Tiger? I'm not sure. Tiger wasn't part of this round.
Well, we're both going back and going forwards at the same time. The bit that is like going back is these big checks, and Tiger is in this round, by the way. They are an investor in this round. But the bit that's different is, in the past, these companies were discovered at the seed stage by people like Aileen Lee, who we talk about this week, and then went through a middle phase being invested in by funds like Sequoia or Accel or Benchmark, and then went through a late stage where money like this would flow. But the relay race between the stages has disappeared. OpenAI seemed to go almost from nothing, a few seed investors, to these huge rounds without going through the middle. And so that raises the question, what happens to the early stage funds that don't initiate these large companies and are therefore not in the value flow from these large companies? And I think that's what's different. This is high stakes, risk being played by very large check writers very early in the life of a company. And
yeah, the narrative's been turned on its head. It's almost as if the principles of quantum computing have been applied to today's world. We'll talk about quantum later. You mentioned the Aileen Lee's response. One of the meatiest pieces in this week's newsletter is a piece from Lee when she asked, do startups have a chance versus big tech in the age of AI? And I guess you could also read that, do VCs have a chance versus big tech in the age of AI? History says yes, in due time. Patience, Aileen Lee is calling for. What's her argument, Keith?
Well, I think she could be accused of reading history backwards. That is to say, assuming the past is going to be repeated in the present.
Which is not something that is something that many of us fall into.
Yeah, well, it's easy and convenient, and you could even argue a little bit lazy to do that, because it means you don't have to think. But her argument is that, the web, Tim Berners-Lee didn't own all of the value from inventing the web. And Apple and Android didn't own all the value from inventing smartphones on mobile. And therefore, same with Web 2. The companies that created the infrastructure for Web 2 are not the same companies that benefited, like Netflix or YouTube or the SaaS companies. So she's arguing that AI is going to be like that the foundation level companies, of which there are, I don't know, maybe 10, are going to create a platform on which lots of value is created that they will not participate in. The timing for that is not yet. Therefore, the right thing to do is wait until the layers above the foundation level become investable. And so I think that's a debatable point of view. It could be right, by the way.
Well, I mean, everything's debatable when it's speculative. No one can be sure. She uses history. It's a nice piece. She talks about platform shift. She talks about previous platforms which have benefited, like Netflix and TikTok. I mean, isn't there I mean, I take your point. Maybe she's slightly lazy in her thinking, but isn't it inevitable that the foundations of AI are being built and that there will be winners in the future that we can't even imagine? And in a sense, the web is the equivalent of OpenAI, or what once was the web is now OpenAI.
Well, here's the reason she might be wrong, and I don't know that she's wrong. By the way, she could easily be right, but there's at least some, and she herself has a paragraph towards the end saying AI is different from the others, and she spells out why. The difference is AI isn't not really a platform. It's more of a replacement technology for knowledge. And once you have a replacement technology for knowledge, especially as we're now beginning to get agents, that is to say, mini AIs that can use the platforms, it's at least conceivable that the foundation layer companies will fill up every other layer themselves.
And they want to. I mean, the whole reason why OpenAI has such an enormous valuation, or that Google stock is worth so much, or Microsoft, or even Apple, is that it's taken for granted that these companies will participate in the other layers.
Yeah. I mean, for the more technical audience, the very concept of a layered stack, which previous innovations have had, may not be an appropriate concept for AI. It may be such a replacement, a more profound platform shift, that you can't recreate the old apps that lived on top of the prior platforms because there's no requirement for them anymore. Like Khan Academy, for example. Take Khan Academy, which was a layer on top of the web and on mobile. It's conceivable that AI can transform education all by itself from the current foundation level using agents and expertise. We talked about expertise a couple of years ago, but expertise in different subjects, sorry, a couple of weeks ago. So builders who want to deliver end user or business facing products may find that those gaps are already filled.
Yeah, it's interesting, Keith. You might not acknowledge this, but I sense a hint of pessimism, unusual, un-Keith-like, un-Tier-like pessimism in your thinking, because you've always been Mr. Democratized technology and the web and opportunities. But if what you're saying is true, then we're going to just see stronger, more and more dominant monopolists or oligarchs, whatever you want to call Google and OpenAI. Do you fear this?
To be honest, I haven't conceptualized my ideas in an optimistic, pessimistic framework. It's more realistic. One of the recommendations from Aileen Lee, and my colleague Rob Hodgkinson wrote a piece this week which echoes that, is be patient and wait. And based on my analysis, the right thing to do is to be aggressive and move fast, because if you don't, the spaces may shrink. And so I'm not really arguing for passivity. I'm arguing the opposite.
No, I didn't say that. But what I'm saying is that you've always believed that new technology would enable the democratization of opportunity and wealth. But
I see. So I'd address that in a different way then. I think AI at the end user point is going to be free. It already is for the most part.
But like social media is quote unquote free, we all know that free,
Yeah.
whenever anything's free, then it isn't.
Well, let's take it step by step. I mean, what price do you pay for free is a separate question, let's say. But I do think ChatGPT 4 is already free. They're rolling out a new thing this week called Canvas into the paid version that costs $20 a month. But most of their revenue, by the way, which is going from 3 billion this year to 11 billion next year, according to their projections, is coming from API payments made by third-party developers, enterprises, and the like, which is how they're seeping into everything through API use.
Mm. And that's a more I mean, that would support Lee's position that it's a foundation and they monetize through APIs, and then you get new companies, new developers, new opportunities, new product.
Well, except the users of the APIs are not other startups. The users of the APIs are directly companies. So
it's a B. So they're doing away with the middle layer, and they're going straight to the consumer or straight to the business.
I don't think that's their plan, but it happens by default because what they've built is so good and the APIs are so available and relatively cheap that enterprise IT departments are building directly with it, not hiring other companies to do so. So enterprise sales is Mark Benioff has just announced what he calls a hard pivot to agent-based AI. Why? Because a website with forms to fill in, it doesn't look like the future anymore.
So what would happen in this world if it's straight from OpenAI to the corporation? What happens to Benioff and Salesforce? Are they part of the obliteration of this middle layer?
There's a narrative that suggests that. It's called systems of record. Systems of record are what we think of as databases with real-time data that feeds the enterprise. And systems of record that are what most third-party companies focus on for management tools and workflow and all those things, of which Salesforce is a big one. And if AI agents can access data and interpret it and act on it, yes, Salesforce is at risk.
And when I always think the word pivot, particularly radical pivot, is just a euphemism for recognizing that whatever you're doing is not working, so you have to do something else. So Benioff's a smart guy, and he must understand exactly what's happening.
Yeah, he was a guest on the All In podcast summit, and they tried to get him to talk about this, and he said he couldn't and wouldn't. And they did a show immediately afterwards, extrapolating from why he wouldn't, what the risks are for him, and it's quite an intelligent conversation worth listening to.
It's a big deal. I mean, it might sound slightly abstract to a non-technical audience, but it changes the very nature of the tech business. You had a couple of other interesting pieces: 5 Qualities of AI Apps by Max Reed, and then something from Ethan Mollick on AI in organizations. Do Mollick and Reed touch on this?
Different ways. They're not doing the same thing. The Max Reed is really trying to home in on use cases, and at an abstract level saying, here's the things you need to be good at if you want people to use AI that you deliver. And I think he kind of concludes that OpenAI is already doing most of those itself. Implicit in his narrative, they are. The other one, which is more about enterprise, is a little bit different. It's basically saying what you need to do to be good in the enterprise at integrating it. And that's the point about speaking directly to the APIs and building it yourself. And it's kind of a roadmap as to how
What about small companies, though? I mean, most small companies don't have AI departments or AI experts. Aren't people still going to be dependent on easy to use products?
Well, remember, there's a huge distinction between an AI model and then using an AI model. The foundation guys are building models, that is to say, core intelligence. You could argue whether it really should be called intelligence, but anyway, core capability, let's call it. And training those models is super expensive and uses terabytes of data, but the end product from the training is something that is only a few gigabytes big. That's the model. And it can act all by itself without ever being required to refer to that data ever again. Now, you can put those models on a smartphone and they'll function. So implementing the models of the big guys is super cheap and easy, almost free. So there's the democratization piece. Democratization is
Well, it's not, but it's not it's democratization in a sense, but it's also knocking out the middle layer and empowering and making OpenAI, maybe Google, one or two of the other core companies more and more powerful. What about Apple in all this? There was an interesting piece. You didn't put it in the newsletter. I think you forgot. It's on Apple's AI is landing soon on iPhones. I was really struck by the fact that you, Keith, who's the ultimate Apple head, if that's the right word, or fanboy, didn't even buy the new phone because it just, if you're not buying it, then God knows who is.
But remember, I've got an iPhone 15 Pro Max. So
yeah, but I'm not criticizing. It's just the reality. It's just you. Every year, I've known you for the last 15 or 20 years. Well, I guess there haven't been 20. But in the last 15 iPhones, you bought the new one. This time, you've chosen not to. It speaks to the way, to borrow some language from Mark Andreessen, that software, at least in the form of AI, is really eating the world, and that the hardware it's not irrelevant, but it's trailing behind.
Yeah. Well, obviously, we all use AI through hardware, but existing hardware is good enough for that. So especially when it's a chat interface like ChatGPT is, you could run it on a Raspberry Pi, which costs $199. So hardware is not a block. Although, of course, on training model side it is, but on the user side, no, it isn't. And Apple, by the way, hasn't shipped Apple Intelligence yet. It's promising it now that it's launched iOS 18 and is it Sequoia, the new OS on the Mac? I think it is.
Yeah, Sequoia, because they got lots of images of big trees.
And
I wonder if Apple's always done a great job making new technology accessible for regular consumers like myself. I'm not the kind of person to go out and buy a Raspberry Pi, Keith. Do you think, and I'm still not convinced by ChatGPT 4 or 5 or 6's relevance to myself. Do you think Apple's integration of AI may be a breakthrough, maybe in a sense a Netscape moment for most mainstream consumers?
I'm going to say no, because I think Apple's constrained the use case so narrowly down to things like summarizing emails or spell checking stuff you write, all of which is using AI and is perfectly good. But it's such a narrow scope. I think already youngsters, I spoke to a class of 20 students when I was in Brussels, and they all use AI. And they use AI for a myriad of different use cases, but they don't have to switch apps to do that. They can use the same AI app for many, many different use cases, which tells you that the scope of AI is pretty much unlimited. And the idea that you're going to need an app for every use case is ridiculous, because the AI can do all those.
So maybe we're at the end, and we're always looking for ends of ages. Are we at the end, in a sense, perhaps, of the app age? I mean, there's nothing inevitable about apps. I remember a time when there were no apps.
We certainly should be. I mean, why do you need an app for knowing the weather? Why do you need an app for knowing the time? Why do you need an app as a calculator? It literally doesn't make any sense anymore. So you can assume that Apple's trajectory is that the phone is more and more minimalist.
Well, the phone is the app.
Well, the phone is just a container for processing.
Right. The phone is the front door to the sort of, I don't know, the mega app, which does everything.
Right. Now, put that in the context of Facebook announced its glasses this week that are truly AR. They're not very good yet, but they're as good as the Apple $3,500 thing,
which you bought,
which I did buy. And you combine earphones with glasses with a microphone, and you've got the interface to AI that can deliver anything you want. And so we're definitely in a moment where how we access uh, knowledge and information, how we communicate, we're at a tipping point of a new set of experiences.
Yeah, and the tipping point, I think I actually probably a little bit more optimistic than you. I think I'm not sure if Eileen Lee is right in her perhaps over reliance on history, but every tipping point creates new opportunities. Maybe we just can't imagine them
Yeah.
quite yet.
By the way, I think she is great because no one else is writing it.
You're being lazy, Keith. Can she be lazy and great?
Well, at least she's addressing the topic and realizes there's something to answer. And by the way, has enough caveats, just like I do, because there's no truth here. We're all guessing.
Right. And everyone's threatened, from VCs like Lee to entrepreneurs like Benioff.
Yeah.
Even the owners. I mean, if you're right and we're at the end of the age of the app, then Google and Apple should be particularly worried, because much of the value of their businesses are based on their app stores.
You know, it's funny that Mark Zuckerberg, for 2 decades now, or at least since 2007, has been really angry that the hardware that sits between us and his content isn't owned by him.
Is that why he changed his hairstyle?
He's changed everything, hasn't he? He looks like I
He
don't
looks
know.
like a figure from the mob with his
Yeah, he's built his muscle
and
mass
his
as well.
chain. He's got the mafia quality to him.
But he's been focused, laser focused, really. Remember, he once tried to do his own phone, on owning the interface to content and information and communications. And the glasses is his latest attempt. It definitely is the case that Apple and Google could lose the audience if they lose ownership of the devices we leverage to get access to content, communications, information. And
Fascinating stuff. I mean, these are huge issues. Once in a decade, or perhaps in a century, we get these kind of things. We'll come back to that. You mentioned earlier, Keith, that you gave a speech at a school in Brussels. We missed last week's show because you were in Brussels, I was in London, and you wrote about unleashing AI for Europe. Can Europe produce world-class AI innovation? You've always been pessimistic about that. Did you come back from Brussels more or less pessimistic about Europe's ability? I mean, and in terms of this open AI issue, it's bad news for Europe. I mean, they're doubly now in jeopardy. I mean, they couldn't keep up with Google and Apple. They're certainly not going to be able to keep up with open AI.
yeah, well, it tells you a little bit about why regulation is such a big topic there, because they're trying to slow it all
Yeah,
down.
but they're fighting. Speaking about fighting yesterday's battle, I mean, worrying about monopolies in the App Store from Google or Apple is profoundly counterproductive in this new environment.
Yeah. No, I came away. It was in the aftermath of Mario Draghi's report about Europe.
Yeah, which we talked about a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah. And now it's interesting. Draghi puts Europe's weakness down to the fragmentation of languages and rules-based regimes, and argues for a stronger centralized EU. I think the opposite is needed, which is bottoms-up innovation from a culture of risk. That's the missing ingredient there. It's interesting. Europe only spends $55 per head on innovation, in venture. The US spends $500 per head per year, and the UK even $320 per head per year. So Europe just isn't a bottoms-up innovation culture. Worse still, of that $55, more than 60% comes from government organizations, whereas 100% of the US comes from private money. So you've really got a top-down, stultified, risk-averse culture in an era of innovation. It just can't work.
Yeah, and all the value in Europe in economic terms increasingly is in its museum-like qualities. So people go and visit its museums, its beaches, its beautiful cities. But by definition, that seems to make their economies increasingly, if not marginal, certainly unable to compete with the US and presumably also with China. I mentioned quantum earlier. You were nice enough to make my interview with Martin Schmidt, who's the president of Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, RPI, which is up there with MIT as a top tech school, about quantum. RPI is the first university to acquire a quantum computer from IBM. I'm not sure if you looked at the interview, but are we at the beginnings, Keith, of the quantum age, just as AI obviously is changing everything? Is quantum existing in parallel, or could it conceivably power AI?
You may have to help me out here, Andrew, because I am not even a good amateur when it comes to quantum. It's a strange world to me. I don't really understand how qubits, which is the unit of storage in quantum, work. I do notice in tests and coming out of labs more and more proof that quantum can be very good at certain things. I'd be interested what he says about whether it can be good at all things.
Well, he doesn't say that, and you'll have to watch it. You made it the interview of the week. Everyone should, of course, watch it, especially that was the week viewers. Keen on people will probably have already seen it. He makes an interesting case. He doesn't overpromise. One of the takeaways that I thought was particularly interesting, actually, from the Schmidt piece was how he believes that the Biden CHIPS initiative, massive investment, is actually beginning to change upstate New York. And this represents the beginning of a fundamental shift in the US economy. So it's not just always about OpenAI and Google and Apple. It's about new factories, new companies, new kinds of hardware initiatives. So it's an encouraging piece, and he's an interesting man. Let's move on, Keith, to startup of the week. You didn't have the cheek to make it OpenAI. Instead, you made it a company called Cerebras. Tell us about Cerebras. Why are they interesting?
And it's I think it's pronounced Cerebras.
Cerebras. I apologize.
Cerebras.
The Cerebras people.
Well, firstly, they filed for an IPO. Secondly, they build AI chips that are specifically built for AI. They're called wafer scale chips, so they're much bigger than the NVIDIA chips that people use today.
Are they? Is it a US based company?
It is, yeah.
So they probably got some funding from the Biden CHIPS Act.
It's here in Palo Alto, and their revenue has gone from 7 million last year to over 120 million this year. And almost all of it's coming from one customer that is leapfrogging current generations and using their chips for AI. It's Middle East-based AI platform, and they claim that their chips are 20 times faster than Intel, 40 times faster in the latest version. Sorry.
No wonder people are. Intel is rumored to be on the acquisition block.
Yeah, and by the way, I made a mistake. NVIDIA, I meant, not Intel.
Oh.
And so they're probably the first semiconductor company saying we're better than NVIDIA. And if they're right, obviously it's going to be super valuable in future. Now, it did come out this morning that their CEO 20 years ago was convicted of accounting fraud.
Oh dear. Well, but it also speaks to the broader conversation this week about the stack. And maybe we're still in the earliest stages of this. We talked before about how Cisco drove the original Web 1 boom of the 90s. So maybe in a sense, we're in such early stages of all this that things are going to dramatically change. We haven't even got to Web 2 or 3 with AI.
Yeah, entirely possible. I know I have a friend who works at Cerebras. He's like the general manager that does all the office bookkeeping, stuff like that. And he speaks very highly of the team and the CEO.
Well, he would do if he works there.
No, you got to know my friend. He's a contrarian. So if there was anything to be said negative, he'd be saying it.
Well, finally, you've changed the name of our final feature on the show to Post of the Week from what is it? Is it Eileen Mitchell? And I don't quite know why this is the post of the week, and I'm reading it out. 3 richest people in the world: Elon Musk, 256 billion; Zuckerberg, 206; Bezos, 205. They're all not that far away from being trillionaires. There's been some people who suggest that Musk will be the world's first trillionaire, which doesn't actually sound that unrealistic. Why did you choose this post, Keith?
Firstly, it's from Threads. You'll be pleased to hear it's not from.
Oh, and you always wrote Threads off as being rather pathetic.
I went looking for something from Threads worthy of posting, and this is the best I could come up with.
The best you could get. Well, it doesn't suggest much of a future for Threads.
But I also thought it's quite topical.
Who is it from? Noel Ellen Lee Mitchell?
I actually don't know. I'm in the same boat as you. I have no idea who this person is, and I don't know where the spaces would be if it was broken out. That said, I thought it's quite topical because billionaires are like the new devils, aren't they? In the popular narrative, there's nothing as bad as being a billionaire. It comes with suggested devil horns on either.
Yeah, it's we used to talk about the 1%. Now we talk about billionaires.
The second thing is Mark Zuckerberg's newly in that top list because of what he's been doing at Meta. So he's a rising billionaire.
Yeah, he's wealthier now than Bezos, which is quite
and
surprising. I never would have guessed that.
And Bill Gates and the Berkshire Hathaway guy as well, not up. So it's a symptomatic that back to the theme of OpenAI, large pools of money are getting larger and dominating. And that begs the question, how do you democratize the benefits of what are obviously great human scale achievements? And I don't have the answer, but I thought this tweet of the week or X of the week or post of the week actually would be would put that question right in the center.
It's interesting in the context of the OpenAI news about raising 6.6 billion. I know that Sam Altman has renegotiated whatever business arrangement he had, and presumably will end up owning more stock. Could you imagine, because of you've always been very bullish on AI, could we imagine Sam Altman at some point getting onto this list?
Hard to tell because we don't know the structure yet, but it's entirely certainly OpenAI, I think, is going to become the world's most valuable company.
Yeah, you've said that many times. Not everyone, of course, agrees with you.
As always, if everyone agreed with me, I wouldn't be me.
Yeah, although it's not a particularly outrageous thing to say. And I mean, what happens? We need to end here. I don't want to make this into another Elon Musk conversation, but what happens if one of these people, Musk, Zuckerberg, or Altman, becomes a trillionaire? What will be the implications? We already see Musk in some ways taking on foreign governments, sometimes even beating them. Is this something? You've always been a great critic of the nation state, Keith, but is this something that you will welcome, that you will celebrate, the world's first trillionaire?
No, because I don't think billionaires are better than nation states. I do think the human race is going to be challenged to answer the question, what could be better than nation states? But the answer will not be billionaires. I do think in the absence of an answer, billionaires fill the void. And so if you really don't want billionaires as globalists to have a lot of power, it's incumbent to come up with an answer of what's next for humanity. And, I don't have all the answers to that, but
you don't have any of the answers. None of us do. And we know that.
Yeah, but I have the question. Most people don't have the question.
Well, it's easy to have the question, what's next? But none of us know. And it seems as if we have companies like OpenAI or the Musk companies, which are increasingly powerful and wealthy, making them increasingly powerful and wealthy. And there's very little evidence of anything else.
Yeah, my intuition is that it's some combination of highly local democracy and global frameworks that allocate resources to agreed human goals. But that's a bit vague and abstract.
That is very vague and abstract. You sound like some UN guy or a mid-level academic, Keith, in a business school. We will come back to this subject. You are not alone in not understanding the future. That's why we have. That was the week, and we will be back next week to talk more big tech with Big Keith Tier. Thank you so much, Keith.
Big and getting bigger if I don't stop eating